The Callisto Protocol has been one of my most anticipated game releases this year for several reasons. First of all, this is a game held by Dead Space director Glenn Schofield, so naturally that in of itself drew a lot of attention from gamers around the world. The resemblance to Dead Space is also pretty strong, as the game is set in space, relatively far into the future, and you're dropped into an environment where you have to fight against hordes of mutated alien monstrosities to survive while uncovering the reason behind this alien outbreak in the first place. Now, on paper, this game sounds just like the spiritual successor to Dead Space we were all hoping it to be. And today I'll be breaking down whether it's worth spending your hard-earned money for this game or not. Now, before I begin, you might have noticed this pale little Swede over here, and this is because I'm using footage from my livestream of Callisto on Twitch. So if you find my Nordic charms irresistible, you could always come over and say hi. Okay, enough shilling. Let's start with some good things about the Callisto Protocol. First of all, the game is absolutely beautiful to look at. I mean, the graphics are just out of this world. Seriously though, the Callisto Protocol is perhaps one of the best looking games I've seen in years, and everything about the graphics really just sets the tone for the game through and through. The textures, facial movements, and animations just look very lifelike, and the fact that you see characters sweating is just, I don't know what to call it. It's just baffling to me that this is where we're at in terms of technology. Lighting is again the best in the biz, and it's easy to just get lost in the little details, like seeing the light reflect off of Jacob as he's moving through the dark corridors of Black Iron Prison. The biophages, this being the main enemy type you'll encounter, are grotesque and disgusting in the best way possible. If you're a fan of gore, then this game will probably satisfy you, at least in the creature department. The sound design is also just extremely good, and as someone who absolutely needs there to be good sound effects to complement any game I play, the audio department over at Striking Distance really knocked this out of the park. Everything from footsteps to voices to cracking your stun baton against a mutated inmate just sounds off, to be honest. Not to mention the ambient sounds, which is probably one of the spookiest elements of the game, as when you're moving through the dark you'll suddenly start hearing something groaning off in the distance. And if there's one thing that managed to make my skin crawl, it's whenever that happens. But these are actually the only times where I've ever felt spooked in this game. You see, throughout my playthrough, I pondered a lot on one question. Why am I not getting scared? If there's one thing I've learned when it comes to survival horror games, it's that whenever you're slightly terrified for most of your playthrough, then you know that the developer has succeeded. I mean, just look back at Resident Evil 2. The hair on my neck was standing up the entire time I was playing that game. And moving through the dead moon of Callisto should by all rights have all your hair standing on end. But for me, that just didn't happen a single time. The fact that I wasn't scared now that I've thought about it is something that I think comes down mostly to the gameplay. You see, the Callisto Protocol features a very prominent melee combat system, where you'll mostly use your stun baton to literally destroy your enemies, breaking parts of their bodies until they stop moving. Sure, there are ranged weapons that you unlock as you progress through the game, but none of them are really as reliable as your good old baton. Part of this is also because fighting at melee range makes enemies more predictable, and by using your left stick to dodge from right to left and left to right, I played this on the PS5 by the way, Jacob dodges and weaves like Muhammad Ali in his prime. Essentially, when you've got the mechanics down, the mutated biophages roaming around on Callisto suddenly becomes the prey, and Jacob becomes the predator. So as most of the combat comes down to dodge, 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 smack, bonk, crack, a certain rhythm starts to build. And with that, most enemies become predictable. Way too predictable. Now, whenever you die, it's mostly due to your own fault, and instead of just starting over right away, you get to watch a 10-second unskippable scene of Jacob getting his body demolished in the most gory fashion imaginable. Unfortunately, I have to cut away from these parts, because if I don't, then YouTube will probably destroy this video. Anyway, Jacob's death scenes are cool, but they do get repetitive. It's not the biggest problem about this game, especially since the game has been advertised by showcasing Jacob dying in more ways than one. But let's get back to the combat for a bit. You see, one additional reason why the melee combat can feel frustrating is because no matter how much you upgrade your stun baton, which is something you can do, there just doesn't seem to be any noticeable difference in how fast certain enemies go down. Sure, sometimes you'll trigger a special execution, but most of the time you're just wailing away at an enemy that just refuses to drop, especially when they start mutating right in front of you, which can become an annoyance whenever even more biophages spawn into the map. Now, of course, you don't always just have to rely on melee attacks, as soon after the intro you'll unlock the GRP or Grip Gauntlet, which allows you to throw objects at enemies or enemies into objects like spiky walls that for some reason seem to cover all of Callisto. However, in the early to mid-game, the gauntlet quickly runs out of power and recharges slowly, meaning you'll have to go back to relying on your good old baton again, unless you want to use up your ammunition, which is already pretty sparse on medium and hard difficulty. Ammunition that you'll be needing for taking down some of the tougher enemies, especially the larger ones that start showing up later on. Now, I'm not really gonna complain about Jacob being a slowpoke, because let's face it, this is a survival horror game, so having your main character move like a bag of bricks is to be expected. What isn't expected, however, is the lack of a map. Yes, you heard that right. The Callisto Protocol does not feature a map. Here's the thing, there are additional bonus areas in this game, bonus areas that contain important resources and other things. The problem is, you don't know which corridor leads to bonus areas and which one is the main route. And if you accidentally skip said bonus area, a lot of the time you'll be cut off from said area, meaning you can't always backtrack to gather stuff that you might have missed. And this, my dear game developers, is why you always include some form of map in your game if you're adding optional areas. Because otherwise people are literally skipping over content that you've made for people to find. Speaking of the UI, there really isn't much to look at here. It's minimalistic and displayed in-game just like it was in Dead Space, so this was pretty much expected. The inventory space might be small early on, but gets increased somewhere mid-game, so it's really not that bad either. Now let's go over the story for a brief second. And, well, let's just say that it's pretty bare bones. The beginning hour is pretty intriguing, but it pretty much falls off after that as you're moving from area to area just trying to survive. There were times that the story managed to pull me in, especially when the game started exploring some of the characters after the first hour of playing. One character especially gets cut short right when we start seeing some actual character development, which was pretty disappointing. Jacob, being the main character, also has some intriguing elements to him, but in the end proves to have a pretty predictable resolution. So what about this great mystery? What is the Callisto Protocol? Well, the game does answer this and more, but it doesn't really dive too deep into the nitty-gritty details. You mostly get an overall summary of what's going on throughout Callisto, but it feels like the mystery mostly gets skimmed over. Maybe this is a way of leaving more questions than answers, because the Callisto Protocol does some pretty heavy sequel baiting at the end of the game, but I just can't help but feel like something was missing to the story. Oh, and before I forget, the jump scares. My god! The jump scares. I hate to bring this up at this point of the video, but I just can't ignore it either. There's just way too many of them, and they're not even the good kind. At one point, you'll start encountering what I like to call grabby faces, that are essentially springed traps that latches onto you from across the room. And they're usually placed in such a way that you can't predict if they will pop out at you or not. And then we have the worms. The worms! These little buggers jump out at you basically half of the time that you're opening resource boxes, and after the first few times it just starts getting so repetitive that you're expecting them to jump out at you, removing the sense of surprise and effectively kills the purpose of the jump scare. Oh my god. Another one of you guys. Now you may have noticed that I have quite the bone to pick with the Callisto Protocol, but I actually like this game a fair bit when it comes to the artistic side, and I just love the concept and the idea of what's causing the outbreak on Callisto. It's a fairly decent mystery that I think deserves more depth, and the characters are alright. The actors actually do a good job portraying the sense of fear and panic of what's going on around them, and Josh Duhamel is pretty likable as Jacob. But it's just the mechanics of the gameplay that makes the whole experience feel more irritating and repetitive rather than fulfilling, which in the end drags down the game for me. Artistically, the game is a AAA title, but gameplay-wise, it's just meh. So no, despite me not having any performance issues on my PS5, I have to say that the Callisto Protocol is just not worth it right now. However, if you do decide to get it either way, I can highly recommend playing it on minimal security if you're just looking for an okay experience that still has a bit of a challenge. And do get it on console if you have one, as I can't say how stable the PC version is currently. Maybe they fixed all the performance issues by the time this video comes out, but you'll have to look it up. However, if the Callisto Protocol goes on sale in the future to maybe around, I don't know, $30, then yeah, I could see that being worth the price. There are a few things that annoyed me through my playthrough that I've skipped over, but I didn't feel like they were worth bringing up because they're very minor. All in all, the Callisto Protocol isn't really a bad game. It's fine. It's serviceable. And then again, this is the first game from Striking Distance, so if they can improve on some of the things that I brought up for a possible sequel, then I'll most likely be very happy. Anyway, that's it for this video. Now, go and have a great day.